I'm a storyteller, and I love hearing people's stories. History helps us not just learn about the past, understand the present, and prepare for the future. As a young girl growing up in small-town America, the daughter of Egyptian immigrants, I was fascinated with this country they came from. I knew very little about it. This is the 80s, so there was no internet, no satellite. The public library in my small town had no books on Egypt, so I was hungry for knowledge about Egypt. And I think I've always had an interest in knowing how we got to where we are today. My first visit that I recall back to Egypt with my parents when I was 12 years old, and I fell in love with Egypt. And upon returning to the US after the summer, I was desperate for knowledge about Egypt. My father had traveled and brought back a copy of Naguib Mahfouz's The Trilogy, As-Sulaseya, an English translation, and I devoured the 3 books. And they're quite long for a 12-year-old, but he writes these 3 novels set in interwar Egypt. And that's when I fell in love with early 20th century Egypt. And then Georgetown had a very strong international program, a study abroad program with AUC. So I signed up for it, and I spent my junior year abroad at AUC when it was in Tahrir. And to this day, it was one of the best years of my life. Actually, living in Egypt was very different than visiting in the summer. And I learned so much about Egypt. I learned so much about myself. And it was actually during an internship at the State Department where I was working in the Near East North African Bureau. And the director would invite scholars from the DC area to come and speak to foreign service officers. And watching the professors speak, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to convey knowledge. That to me was much more interesting, teaching people about a region, a culture, a religion. And then I knew I needed to master Arabic. So I applied for CASA, Center for Arabic Study Abroad, which AUC housed for many, many years and still does. So I returned to AUC a second time. And then I went on to grad school and focused on Egyptian history. So my research brought me back to Egypt as a researcher. And then I finished my PhD, and the only place I wanted to work was AUC. I mean, people who study the Middle East and live outside of the Middle East will never completely comprehend the Middle East. But I'm so privileged to live in the country that I research, that is the focus of my research, that is the focus of my teaching. It's a lived history, and AUC has afforded me that privilege. The faculty that come to AUC, among the Egyptians, they're the cream of the crop, and they're the best in their fields. But the foreign faculty that come to the region are usually the most interesting kind of people. First of all, those that come to the region because they want to live in the countries they study, really take their research to a whole other level. Another advantage of being at AUC is the library and the incredible wealth of primary sources it has. AUC really puts a lot of effort into creating a very collegial and friendly environment. My first book was born out of my dissertation, and it is a history of the marriage crisis, Azmet el-Zawaj. And I actually became inspired to research this topic, I would say first in 1999, 2000. It was the second time I was living in Egypt. Everyone and their mother was talking about khula. A law had been introduced that Egyptian women, Muslim women, could request to be divorced from their husbands. And there was so much passion and excitement in the air, and arguments and debates and jokes, and everyone was connecting it to something called Azmet el-Zawaj. Men wouldn't marry if their wives could divorce them immediately. And I thought to myself, okay, something is up here. So I knew I wanted to study marriage. And I was looking at court records, which is very painful to read handwritten Arabic from the 19th century. And then I was shocked because I'm looking at newspapers and magazines from the 1920s. And 1990s, early 2000s Egypt was talking about Ezmet Zaweg as if it was a sudden phenomenon. But here I am, 80 years earlier, looking at records that are talking about the same exact phenomenon and using the same exact term as a metaphor to envision the kind of society they wanted for the future independent Egypt. They were using the marriage crisis to lament the changing roles of women. They were using the marriage crisis to critique the colonial economy, to criticize the British, to criticize even the king for not taking care of its citizens. So it's so much more than marriage. It's a window into the state of the society. When I started my career at AUC, I was shocked that Egyptian society, Egypt, the country with the oldest history in the world, the country that makes most of its money from tourism because everyone in the world is obsessed with Egypt's history. And as Egyptians, we don't always, we appreciate history, but we don't always understand the utility of making a career out of studying history. And this is one of my personal missions at AUC, is to convince students and their parents how history can prepare you for anything in life. The humanities teach you how to read critically, how to analyze everything, how to research skills, teaches you how to write and how to present publicly. All these skills are the skills we want for our employees. And any career.
I'm so honored, so proud of the research and writing skills.
I'm a teacher before I'm a researcher. That is my calling in life. And I've known it since I was a little girl. I'm here to teach. You can teach before a classroom, and you can teach through your writing, and you can teach through your research. So I'm a teacher. The most favorite moment for me is when I see a student puzzling, and you can read it in their eyes. You can tell you've presented them with something they had never thought about before. And you see their mind churning, and then you see a light bulb go off. For me, that is the most gratifying moment, is to challenge what people think they know. I feel the most alive when I'm in a classroom. And no matter what mood I am, what's going on in my life, I walk into a classroom and I forget everything. During COVID, when we were all under sudden lockdown and classes moved online, I could really see the students struggling. It was a very difficult time for everyone, everywhere in the world. And what I realized from my students is that they didn't have very basic self-care skills that could help them through this difficult time. I myself had been on my own journey of learning to care for myself mentally, physically, but I'm a historian, so I always look at the origins of things. So I thought, how cool would it be to create a course that looks at the practices that supposedly make us happy and look at the histories of those practices. So this research, which is my current research now, it's being taught in 2 different classes, a history of happiness, a history of healing.
Who here attempted happiness? Hands up high, I want to see them.
Connection is what drives me, is the world would be a much better place if we saw how much more we're alike than we are different. We share much more in common across gender, race, class, but also across time. History is not a collection of facts. It's a collection of stories and different versions. And there are many different versions to an event. And who decides the version is actually the more interesting part of the story. It's about how the tide turns and shifts and adjusts throughout time.